Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. I'm Jason.
And I'm TC. Before we go on with this, I want to say what we're about to talk about is more in Jason's lane. I don't know a whole lot about any of this, so I'm basically here for moral support. When it comes to spending money, the most amount of money I've ever spent was when I attempted to shoot AIM-7 Sparrows off of the F-14. The first three failed completely because they were very, very old models. The guys that are out there in the fleet, they don't get to shoot the new stuff.
How much money is that you spent?
I have no idea. But they failed, they were old, they didn't work. And imagine my surprise when they finally gave me an F model that actually came off the rail. My Fox 2 and the up away was a high-pitched, holy shit, it fucking happened, squeaky voice. Because after all the other attempts, it's like, okay, I'm bored, this isn't going to work. So, anyway, I'm here for moral support.
Let me say, I will go ahead and say, too, that I wouldn't call this my wheelhouse. I'm not an economist. I'm not a trader. I don't have an MBA from anywhere. But I have studied a lot about business and how business works. I've read a lot. I've been in, a lot of rooms, interesting rooms with interesting people. And I don't find myself to be very intimidated in those situations. So I tend to ask questions, and you'd be shocked at the answers you might get from people. Anyway, I don't claim that it's my wheelhouse, but here's the thing. Economics and how it works isn't the basics of it isn't really complicated. It's pretty simple math. It's big numbers, but it's pretty simple math. So we're going to go through some of that. But I would just like to say that in a situation like this, I would sooner talk shit about the President of the United States than I would individuals that I've been in rooms with. And that's mostly because I have a whole constitution that stands between me and the President. And even with this current administration, which I think we all feel like is a little iffy, there's a whole constitution that stands between me and the President. There's not a ton in the law that stands between a wealthy person using their might to squash a tiny person. Like, you can bring a suit for almost anything. So,
well, whether it's hiring lawyers or just coming in, writing a check and buying whatever it is you have, taking it away from you.
Yeah. So anyway, I've been in interesting rooms with interesting people, and that's about all I'm willing to say about that, as Forrest Gump might say. Anyway,
he's overheard much of this.
Yeah. Or in some cases just had questions directly answered. But anyway, I want to start this week. Well, last week we talked about myths, myths of capitalism, things that they want you to believe about capitalism, and how, quite honestly, if I'm being honest, is how they want you to think it should work. And, if you're the fastest gun in the West, then you want like laws that are like, no body, no crime, or, things that kind of advantage you. And so we talked about myths of capitalism and different things, gave a lot of examples. And we ended it, talking about monopoly and about the fact that assets are limited and what a problem that can be. This week, I kind of want to start by talking about the expanse of these numbers. All of us kind of, this day and age, we all kind of throw around numbers, a million, a billion, a trillion. Those are all words that we hear in conversation on TV.
Is that a B or an M?
Yeah, billion with a
T?
B, a trillion with a T. You know,
Who was it? One of the senators, or I think it was a senator. A billion here, a billion there. Eventually, it all adds up to real money.
yeah. Well, essentially, what we're talking about is multiples of 1,000. So, try and think about it in terms of time. So, $1 million is still a lot of money, by the way. I don't think any of us, including billionaires, I don't think any of us would turn down somebody giving us $1 million. And even billionaires would tell you $1 million is a lot of money to lose. Everybody's life would be altered in some kind of way over $1 million. It's still a lot of money. You know how long 1,000,000 seconds is, right?
I used to. I forgot.
Did you
That
forget?
brain cell died with the rum last night.
So 1,000,000 seconds is 11 days. So not even half a month. You can probably
Week and a half.
You can probably remember what you did 11 days ago, maybe. 1 billion seconds.
30-some years.
31 and a half years.
That's huge.
That's the expanse. And 1 trillion seconds. So we talk about trillions, like for instance, budgets. The federal budget is talked about in trillions. We've seen the rise over the last few years of the first $1 trillion companies. There is conversation in the news about the world's first potential trillionaire, an individual with that kind of money. Care to know how long 1 trillion seconds is?
31,000 years.
We would have to go to 30,000 BC to get to 1 trillion seconds.
I did math in public.
So hopefully that can kind of give you a grip, help us all kind of get a grip on the expanse of these numbers. If you are worth $100 million, that's a lot of money. $100 million company is a sizable company. If you're worth $100 million, that's a lot of money. But if somebody has $1 billion, they could buy you 10 times over. That's just 1 billion, and we have people that, in our society and around the world that have tens of billions or even hundreds of billions of dollars. So try and wrap your head around the idea of that much money.
31,000 years.
Yeah, that much money. And, what kind of, because it's not about the money. It's not about the money for them either. It's about the power. What kind of power that can generate. We saw over the last 4 years a very lengthy legal battle against a former president with 91 federal
felony counts.
Indictments. 91. Even if you were being generous and said that half of them were bullshit or 2/3 of them were bullshit, you're still talking about 30 federal indictments. And, for the cost of $50-60 million, you can fight it. You can prolong it. You can ask questions about the dictionary and words in the dictionary and what they mean. And you can prolong things, and you can pay people to move evidence around, and they're just this huge manner of things. And $50 or $60 million to somebody who has a couple of $1 billion of net worth.
Kind of chump change.
It's a tax, really. They could see a tax bill that large.
Unfortunately, it went to lawyers as opposed to
I would say fortunately, it went to lawyers. I mean, at least the money's getting spent. At least the money is being put back into the system in some kind of way, because not
As
only
opposed to squirreled away.
or moved out of the country. So let's talk a minute about the difference between, we're talking about millions and billions, and let's just talk about the difference between big earners and big owners, because there is a difference. You would think that people that had millions of dollars, you know, those are very wealthy people. But there are people who get that money because they're good at something that they do, or because they're popular. Big earners, for instance, could be an example of big earners could be
The CEO of a nonprofit like Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, who is reported to have earned $20 million a year.
Another example of a big earner would be maybe a newscaster, Joe Scarborough, or Sean Hannity, or a Tucker Carlson, or a Rachel Maddow. Those people make $10, $15, $20 million a year or more. A movie star or a sports figure could be an example of a big earner. People who have 7 and 8 figure incomes every year. Another example might be an attorney to wealthy companies that they get paid in percentages of deals. So they could make millions of, they get paid in percentages to negotiate. So they could make millions of dollars in one deal. Those are all examples of big earners. Now, big earners can definitely become big owners if they manage their money properly. But in a lot of cases, big earners spend a lot of money. For example, sports figures. They spend a lot of money on doctors and trainers, and they're not investors, a lot of them. So
entourages, jewelry,
they
parties.
lose money. In a lot of cases, because they invest in things that aren't great investments, because they're not investors and they're not managing their money well. Same with law offices. They have to pay investigators. They have high overhead. So maybe they're big earners, but they have to spend a lot of that money. Same thing with public figures like newscasters and whatever. They make a lot of money, but they also have to spend a lot of money. Big owners, on the other hand, are something different. These are people that are risk managers. They are risk takers and risk managers. And their whole purpose for existing is to manage assets. What did we say about assets last week?
Limited.
Assets are limited. So hedge fund managers, and these are people who you do not likely know their name. In some cases, big owners can be tech companies that are producing a product or a service that is loved by the masses. We think about Zuckerberg. We think about Bezos. People who have figured out a way to be very ingenuitive in such a way that they affect a lot of people's lives. They have massive amounts of shares in large companies. Now, big owners, let's just look at what an example of a portfolio of a big owner might be. Take somebody who has a portfolio of $3 billion in assets. A poorly managed portfolio, somebody who's not paying close attention to the fees that they're paying, or maybe they're holding on to assets for nostalgic reasons, but they're not, they're not paying as well as they could dump that asset and invest in something else, and they're just not taking advantage of that. A poorly managed portfolio of $3 billion is still going to produce a passive income of somewhere between $30 and $60 million. So let's just make the math simple. Let's say $48 million a year. Now, maybe you're going to have some debt service or something like that because you're borrowing some money because you're converting one asset to another or whatever, or maybe you're converting an asset to a foreign asset and you're using borrowed money to do that, and maybe you've got a little debt service. But keep in mind, you don't have a lot of payments because the reason you're worth $3 billion is because you own assets. You own it, you know. So let's just say $48 million a year. That's $4 million a month. And you own your house, you own your cars, you own all of these things.
That's about a million a week.
Million a week. You live like the king on $100,000 a week. Like, it's, you know, you're only awake so many hours a day. You eat food and traveling places and doing, you know, you live like king on $100,000 a week. So that's $400,000 a month. That's $3.6 million a month coming in that you need to find something to do with. You know how your bills come in like clockwork every month? And, you know, I gotta pay these bills, They have the opposite problem. They have this income coming in like clockwork from owning these assets every month. Bang, 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 millions of dollars. And they have to find places to put it. And what did we say about assets?
They're limited.
There's only a handful of things that you can even put money in. Managing money is difficult. What do we got? We got real estate, some kind of personal or commercial real estate. That's an asset you can put money in. Farmland, that's an asset.
Farmland.
There's stocks and bonds. So some type of stock portfolio, whether it's closely held stocks, private stocks, or publicly traded stocks, or bonds. The government offers bonds, some kind of thing like that, something that could be traded, fairly liquid. There's some type of business venture. So either you're going to hold, here again, close personal held stocks in a venture, or angel investments, things like that, some type of business venture. Arts and antiquities, classic cars, Van Gogh, Renoir,
Jay Leno's garage,
somebody's, I don't know, Marlon Brando's desk or dining room table or chandelier that you could have in your house.
Dorothy's ruby slippers.
Precious metals and gemstones, your watch, your jewelry, your rings, those all have value. They hold value because they're made of gold and diamonds, but there's only so much of it how many watches can you have? It's heavy, it's got to be protected, you have a safe, you got to move it around. It's a problem. That's about it. That's about all there is in terms of assets to put money. And there's only so many stocks. Not every company is offering stock buys. A lot of companies use the wealth that they make to buy their stocks back when they offer them publicly. What are we seeing now? More companies are going private than they're taking public companies private versus the other way around, So assets are limited, and there's nothing that keeps really wealthy people from spending their money here. So if assets are limited here, there's foreign markets that they can invest in. There's nothing really keeping wealthy people from investing in foreign markets. So, they can move their money offshore. And then, maybe the asset works out, maybe it doesn't. The money's offshore and they're not getting paid any taxes on it, or they're not paying any taxes on it. And lo and behold, they learn that there's shelters. They can start pulling money. If they can't find something to do with it where it can make money, they can pull it out of the system and put it in a shelter. The truth is, if you ask people who look at wealthy people for a living, they will tell you it is very difficult to get an actual number on what a lot of these people are actually worth anyway.
They may not know.
Because they have the ability to pull money out of the system. And then what? And then the country gets to the end of its fiscal year and, oh, look at that. There's not enough money to pay the bills. And I guess we got to sell more bonds. Guess we got to have more debt, and pay more debt service. It's a snowball. It's a snowball downhill. And the other thing that they can do, and this is what we've been talking about with respect to corruption, and this is kind of where we're going to start wrapping it up. If acquisitions and mergers look stodgy, purchase the government.
If the investor thinks that acquisitions and mergers look stodgy, then they can just resort to purchasing the government.
That's why you change laws. That's why you get rulings like Citizens United. That's why you end up with things like super PACs. And, what did we just say about
change the law?
What did we just say about spending $50-60 million to fight a lawsuit to stay alive? That's chump change. Why wouldn't it be chump change to put $50-60 million into a super PAC to get your guy elected?
Current event, this whole ABC Kimmel Disney thing they were able to push that stuff off and fire Kimmel because the FCC is looking at a merger that two big ABC station owners, Sinclair and Net something or other,
Netstar,
are going to try and merge. But it's so big, they need to have an exemption. They're into the monopoly, not the game, but becoming a monopoly. And because of that, they need to get an exemption. And that's why the FCC chairman was able to say, well, if you want to do this merger, you need this exemption, and I'll give you the exemption if you fire Kimmel.
Washington talked about unprincipled men. And, we have laws in place, monopoly laws, antitrust laws, that are supposed to govern these things. And those laws are failing. And the only excuse you can point at to the failure is the purchase of our government. And I want to go back to the reason that we're talking about this is because it is detrimental to our society. In 2008, we watched CEOs of super wealthy multinational corporations fly their G5s into Washington, D.C. and tell the American people that they were too big to fail. I would remind you that this was pre the first $1 trillion company. These companies sold to the American people that they were too big to fail. And it was pre the first $1 trillion company. Now we have $1 trillion companies, and we're talking about the potential of the world's first trillionaire. Are these individuals going to try and start selling to us that they're too big to fail? And if they are too big to fail, we pretty much deemed in 2008 that those companies were too big to fail because we bailed them out. We set that precedent. And if they're going to sell that to us, should they not be managed differently? Should they not be managed
more strictly
accordingly?
Mm-hmm.
Last week we ended with the idea of, if you tax them, they'll leave, or if you tax us, we'll leave, which is just a ridiculous, unpatriotic thing to say. But it's also a myth because assets are here. You can't pick up the building and move it to the place. And I understand that people are going to say, yeah, but the law is that they can just move and then they don't pay taxes here because they don't live here. Well, guess what? Change the law. That's what they're doing. That's what they're doing. When they deregulate Glass-Steagall so that they can turn our entire investment world into a casino, they're making money winning and losing. And next week we're going to talk about economics and how economics works, that money isn't lost. Money moves from one ledger to another. All balance sheets come to zero. Money isn't lost. But anyway, change the laws. That's how we deal with this. And I'm fine with people making lots of money. And I'm fine. Here's one of the answers that you can get from wealthy people if you just press them and talk to them about it. They're happy to tell you at some point your life is paid for. Whether you're like Warren Buffett and you just live conservatively and spend all your time investing your money, I think Warren Buffett lives in his parents' house, like a 3,800 square foot house. He's worth tens of billions of dollars. You're either conservative and you live a nice life, but a conservative life, or you time out. And what I mean by that is there's only 24 hours in a day. You can only spend so much money in a day, in the course of a day, and you got to sleep sometime, and you just time out. You just can't spend any more money. Either way, at some point your life is paid for. And then everything beyond that is just keeping score. And they will say it that way because it's a game to them. What is survival for you and me is very much a game to them. And if assets are limited, think about Southern California. Think about Hawaii, and San Francisco and LA and New York, where wealthy people move in and they pay exorbitant prices for the best real estate, and they make it impossible for the plebes to live there.
Just like they did in Venice. The local workers can't live there. They're all living in mystery.
Because assets are limited. All right.
And that's why they want your farmland.
Yeah.
And they don't care that the Arkansas soy or the Kansas wheat farmers are going under.
No.
Because they're just going to swoop in and buy up the property.
They're buying up houses. They're buying up subdivisions. Because they need places to put the money. If it comes available, they stick it where they can stick it. Mm-hmm. It's harder than you think to manage money. And
but it's easier to change the law,
especially if you're trying to keep it out of the hands of the government. That's what I'm saying. It's very difficult. If you're trying, you got to do something with it, or it shows up on your ledger and then you have to pay taxes on it. It's a hard thing to do. We're going to talk about more of that next week, and taxes and how all that works and what the motivations are. But anyway,
torches and pitchforks.
Torches and pitchforks. I'm not against people making money, folks. I'm not. But I am against
theft and taking it from you.
I'm against people having enough money to be able to fight all of us. I don't think that that's what the framers had in mind when they were developing our free nation and when they said no kings. And I'm definitely not for people being able to tell us that we're going to live in a country that we didn't choose. That's not what this is about. And there are things that we can do to protect ourselves. All right, we got to go. Next week, we're sticking to it, y'all. We got at least one more week of corruption of capitalism, and then we can move on to other things.
Think about the new aristocracy in this country.
Yeah.
Think about families that are famous just for being famous.
If you made it this far, like and subscribe. Tell your mom and them, and tell somebody younger than these guys, because those are the rights that we're trying to protect. All right.
Good night.
Good night.